Hello, folks. Welcome to Rational Science, the only site on the internet that does physics. Everybody else does what? They do mathematics. What is mathematics? It's when you move concepts around. Here we can only move or propose only to move objects. You also do a little bit of extinction of man, and any subject related to that. Okay, we say that we are the last humans or last generation of humans on Earth. We don't have very long to go. Okay, so let's get on with some of these issues related to extinction. Some people sent some questions, and so I'm going to address those. Okay, and lately we've been talking about the subject started a couple weeks ago, where I mentioned that there's a case where this fellow he changed his sex. He didn't change categories in kickboxing. He changed sex, and so now after 35 years of being a male, he turned himself into a woman, and now he's fighting women, and he's beating them, making money, becoming famous, and the women are a little upset, saying, "Look, this guy is really a guy, and he looks like a guy. I mean, he's got the body of a man, but supposedly he's a woman because he made a sex change operation." And so the question is, should that be allowed? And then the counter argument is, why not? I mean, we have women; they want equality in many fields, and they probably deserve, in every field to be equal to men. The question is, why not in sports? Why not make all sports unisex? Even the tough ones like, boxing and wrestling and so on, weightlifting, bodybuilding, all these um, rough activities, we can call them, right? Why not? Why not have everybody compete against everybody? In fact, women will come up the ranks much faster, become better because they have to compete against men. There's going to be a learning curve, and the question is if that learning curve leads to equality, where someday you get a boxing champion, which is a woman instead of a man, beats the heavyweight champion of the world, male, and we have a female world champion. Why not? Isn't that possible? And I'm sure there's a lot of opinions out there, especially men. But the question is, women have come up the ranks. There are women who fight out there, and they are professionals. These guys look at them and say, "Oh, he's just a girl. She's just a girl." No, you're not. You're not looking at a girl. You're looking at a gladiator. She can beat the tar out of you. So why not? Why not have unisex sports? That way we have total equality everywhere in salaries and rights, sports, right? And so some people answered or made questions around that subject. Here's one fellow, and he says, in most relationships, women have more power than men. Okay, typical woman controls the relationships thanks to three major levers of powers. Positions herself as the most valuable party, sets a frame where the man's job is to cater to her needs, assess the man's value and worthiness based on how well he provides for her. Most women do it subconsciously, and most men accept her frames without even realizing they are being controlled. Aha. Says women treat men like children. Women get quiet. Women flatter men. Women compare men to other men. The majority of women aren't interested in physical competition with men. Yeah, they're not interested, of course not. And likewise, most men are not even in competition in sports. It's for people who want to make money, who might want to make a career out of it, that I'm talking about. Obviously, it's a small percentage of humanity. And I'm saying if those women want to make money, well, what's wrong with having them compete against men? And if we do it today, more men will beat more women. The men will be in the upper half of those rankings. But the issue is, how much time will it take for women to females to catch up? and be on the par with men. Isn't that possible? And so that's the question, you should ponder. Okay? I'm not saying they will, I'm just saying that they might, and it's just a question of how much time we have. If we have very little time, as I think we have on the clock, that extinction's around the corner, I don't think it'll ever happen. But if we had another 100 years, 200 years, everybody competing against everybody, why not? And as far as, being dominated and so on, you got all kinds of relations out there. You got men who dominate women, women who dominate men. You've got women who treat men like kids and vice versa, so I think you've got everything out there. It's just a question of, I don't know what percentages are on either side, but to say that women control men, yeah, to some degree, and men control women as well. So I don't know. Uh, I don't know if you can reach any conclusion on that. I'm not even sure there's a study that shows something like that. Okay, another fellow along the same lines, same issue, says chromosomes alone not only denominators for sex. He's saying that, we should not judge whether a person's male or female just on the chromosomes. Like women, double X, and you have males XY. He gives the example here. There is a intersex, birth defect, born individuals that are more common nowadays. They have Klinefelter syndrome, also called XXY syndrome. I guess they are born with all these chromosomes, these weird chromosomes. There are also other types of chromosome disorders. The definition for sex has to be more rigorous than just the chromosomes. Yeah, I'm not sure you can find a perfect definition, not for sex. All I'm saying is we have a practical definition, something that is more or less objective and that applies to over 99% of humanity. Now, as time goes by, we have some weird cases, probably because we've had a lot of inbreeding for thousands of years. We bred only with our species, and after a while, you whittle all that diversity away. Over time, there's a more uniformity in our genes, in our gene pool. And there you have an animal, it's the Komodo dragon, and he does it, she really, I'm going to talk about the she's, has a WZ chromosome, and she is able to have children all by herself without the aid of a male. Okay? And other lizards and other animals have that ability as well. And so, yeah, I mean, we can have a male in our species that is born with, I don't know, WZ. Instead of XXY, XY, he's born with WZ. Or it, whatever you want to call him. And yeah, there is a small percentage, but not because of that. I think we can say, well, then we can't define sex. I think for practical purposes in this case, all we're trying to figure out, again, is if male and female can compete against each other, and I think for that, using the XXXY is just fine. And if the guy is a fellow who changes sex and goes fight with a woman, well, there's two issues there. One, should he be allowed to fight these women? Is this fellow a he or a she? Just because he changes sex, especially at the age of 30, 35, like in this case. And the other one is, why not? Why can't he fight? Should we all fight against each other if you're going to talk about professionalism, right? And yeah, most people don't go and fight, and most people don't become gladiators, okay? So it's just for those people who want to make money, want to make a career out of it. Should they be allowed to fight anyone against anyone, everyone against everyone, in video games, I don't play these video games, but I've seen my kids play quite a bit. And you see females with all these superpowers fighting against males. The characters they put on there on the screen are females. Why should we limit that to video games only, where the female has all these superpowers and throws, this energy or whatever nonsense they've got in those video games? Well, why limit it to to the video games? Why not have it in real life? Why don't we go out there and fight in real life, male against women, male against female. Any problem with that? I mean, is there something wrong with that? A lot of females might say, well, that's unfair. Well, what's unfair about it? I mean, there are females out there within a given weight category that are more skilled than a male and will beat them. And so you'll have this ranking, and maybe the first 10 will be males, and maybe the 11th will be a female. And then over time, you'll have maybe the fifth one will be a female. And maybe further on, maybe the second one will be a female. I mean, can that happen? Okay, that's the question. And if that can happen, why not have unisex sports? Why limit it to everything else? And yeah, I mean, we don't have equality certainly in birthing. I mean, we don't do that. They do that. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, we don't have perfect equality, but again, it's just a question of people who want to become professionals and want to make a career out of it. Maybe they should just run against male, swim against them, fight against them. The whole works, all sports. Okay, teams, male teams against female teams. Why? Why not just make it intersex? Completely mixed against mixed. We do it in softball, don't we? I mean, I played softball and we played it with mixed teams. We did also, I played with, not professionally, obviously, volleyball, mixed teams. What's different about a woman in that sense? I mean, she can hit the ball just as much as any male, right? Okay, and some are even more skilled than a lot of males, so yeah. Okay, so this comes down really to this issue about chromosomes and DNA and our genetic code. And one of the issues there is that this article that I saw in, I think it was Berkeley, and it says, as an endangered species dwindles, it loses genetic variation. Okay? But it says, as a species dwindles. Okay? Now keep that in mind. And even if the species rebounds, okay, like you see there, the blue line going back up, population increases. Okay? Says its level of genetic variation will not. Okay? So even if the population rebounds, okay, doesn't mean they're going to recover genetic variation. They're still going to have very low genetic variation. Why? Because genetic variation will only slowly be restored through the accumulation of mutations over many generations. For this reason, an endangered species with low genetic variation may risk extinction long after its population size has recovered. Okay, so yeah, I think you have this situation where, for example, humans, we've lost quite a bit of genetic diversity over the centuries. We have a relatively low genetic diversity, considering that we're 8 billion people on the planet, and the geneticists don't really know what's happening. But here you have a clue. These people are saying, you can lose genetic variation over time, but usually when the population dwindles. In the case of man, we have lots of population, but very little genetic diversity. Some monkeys out there, some chimps in Africa, as I showed previous lectures, have more genetic diversity, maybe 50, 100 chimps, than all of the human race. How can that possibly be? Here you have a small group, and they have more genetic diversity than all of the human race. And again, I'm saying that we lost genetic diversity over time. And what's the problem that I see with this? Well, it's not focused properly, because when they talk about extinction in this context, they go completely off on left field. They go on a tangent. And what's the tangent? Here it is. Here's the comment that follows this, and it goes something like this: says, the risk of extinction or population decline because of low genetic variation is predicted by evolutionary theory. Okay, great. Epidemics could sweep through a species with low genetic variation, increasing their chances of extinction. In other words, what are these geneticists talking about? What they're saying is that a species that has very low genetic diversity is in danger of becoming extinct only because they could get a disease for which they have no defenses. That's the argument, okay? And I'm saying that has absolutely nothing to do with anything. Okay, this is where they make their error. No species ever died because of disease. Disease doesn't kill species. Okay, and so when these people talk about, oh, they have very low genetic diversity, if a disease comes over, kills them all, or kills many of them, that's not the issue. The issue is that when you have low genetic diversity, you are inbreeding, you're going to produce garbage as children. You're going to produce what we see today among humans. We're not producing good stock now. And there are many parameters, among them, low sperm counts, et cetera, et cetera. There are many clues that we're not producing good children today. So the children that we're producing today are not of the quality that we had 200, 300 years ago. They're not of the same quality because we've been inbreeding. It's like, the kings of Russia, the Tsars, and they had hemophilia because they inbred. I showed also that the Charles II of Spain, he was from the Habsburg family, and they all intermarried, and eventually came down to Charles II, several generations after, the founders, and he was born, they call him a bewitched because he had mental problems, and he was born like that. And so, a lot of these inbreeding is what really is the problem. And you can't have a species live on forever inbreeding and expect not to have at some point some genetic problems. And I'm saying all these genetic problems that we have today are related to the fact that we've been inbreeding. That's where the danger is, not in the fact that we're susceptible to diseases. That's the least of our problems. The problem is that we're all marrying each other, and whoever you marry today is either your brother or your sister from a genetic point of view. When you do that, it's the same thing that happened to the Tsars and so on, the Habsburgs. What you're doing is you're having two people who have the same genetic code and they have children. Nothing good is going to come out of there. And you see that also with the Amish. Amish are also having problems, genetic problems. Why? Because they've been inbreeding for, 300 years now? That's the issue. So it's not an issue of that you are now more susceptible to catch a disease for which you have no defenses. Okay? It's the other one. It's the fact that you're going to produce children with genetic problems. That's my argument. Okay. Okay, here's another file. It says estrogenization of the environment is bound to change human sexual identity and behavior. So there we have the Sandman. He's pouring all this estrogen in the environment. Okay. Well, there are studies, but those studies are based on lab experiments, and those are very controlled experiments where they, pollute the environment. But to think that estrogen is floating around, that's a far cry. I think you can't generalize from what you see in an experiment. Okay, so yeah, you have these environmental problems, and I put little weight on environmental problems. I say that most of our problems have to do with inbreeding, with the fact that we've lost genetic diversity and we keep inbreeding, just marrying our own type. And eventually, that's got to produce some problems. And I think that's what we're seeing out there today. Okay? I think a lot of these problems are genetic, or, from a genetic point of view. And we're not going to overcome them. I think it can only get worse. There's no way you can undo what we're doing now. Okay? Okay, another fellow says the word sustainability is code word for the globalists, like the handshake for the Masons. When one combines this information with a revolutionary, counter-revolutionary new constitution, which acknowledges climate change, same-sex marriage, presumption of innocence, and God forbid, private property, there is only one conclusion: we are entering the age of great convergence. Cuba will become more and more like the U.S., and the U.S. will become more like Cuba. The end is near, as you foretold. Okay, yeah, one of the things that you see in the world, and I think it does reflect quite a bit on extinction, the fact that all countries are becoming more uniform in the type of governments they have. It's a mixture. It's not communism and it's not capitalism, not any longer. Now it's all mixed systems. Some parts of the economy are handled in a socialistic manner, perhaps health, like here in Germany, for sure, education, more or less everywhere. Um, what is it? Disability, unemployment, retirement, all those things are handled in a socialistic fashion. On the other hand, you have also capitalism. China is not a communist country under no circumstances. All it has about communism is its name. Other than that, China is just the same as the United States. It has, one party. In the United States, there's only one party with two names. In China, it has only one name. That's the only difference. But other than that, it's the same thing. You have a ruling group, and those people live well, and then you have the people at the bottom, majority of them, right? Um, Way at the bottom, they're poor. In the middle, you got the middle class. That's the same almost in every country. It's just that different countries have different levels of income, and so that pyramid doesn't always have the same shape in all countries. In some countries, the middle class is a little bigger or quite a bit bigger than in other countries. That's the only difference. Other than that, they all have this pyramid structure. So, there is no communism and capitalism in that sense. And if you go to Cuba, in many ways, you'll find that it's like the United States. And you say, is that so? Yeah, I'm telling you, I've been there several times, and there's a black market out on the streets. Rugged capitalism right on the streets, and people trade and they do their thing, and nobody can control so many transactions going on the streets. The only problem with Cuba, they've got nothing to trade in general. You know. Other than that, people are the same everywhere. People like to trade and they like to have things and they want to have things, and so whether it's communist or capitalism, it doesn't matter. People trade and they want and they get things that they want. So there is not that much difference between countries. Okay, they all have you call it capitalist slash communist economy, society. You want to call it socialism. You want to call it center left, whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing. They all have more or less the same system. Very little difference. And dictatorships are a question of how much you really know. I mean, you go to North Korea and say, well, that's a dictatorship. Well, what is a dictatorship? That they control the armed forces and they control the news that reaches you and the resources? Well, what's different with other countries? Poor people in every country have the same problem. They're not the ones who rule. They don't have the power, and they have to live with what's essentially given to them, whatever's available to them according to their income. And in that sense, they are slaves, the people way at the bottom. So there's very little difference, really. The only difference is some countries are richer than others. And so they can afford to give their population something more than other countries. So if you take a country in Africa, almost any of them, compare them against Germany here, yeah, the level of income here is much higher, okay? And so people are not in as bad a shape as in other countries. Other than that, there's a pyramid here and there's a pyramid over there. The pyramid over there is just a little lower. That's all it is, quite a bit lower in some cases. But other than that, there's always a pyramid. People at the top and powerful people who control the money, the resources, the law, the news, and those at the bottom that are on the receiving end. That's about it. Okay, let's move on to the subject matter today, which is the existence of time. And what I'm going to do today, I'm going to start my lecture with a little magic trick. Okay? So I hope you're ready for this. Okay, I'm going to perform a magic trick that's never been done in the history of humanity. Okay, you've seen it here first. Okay, I'm going to make time disappear. Now, how's that for a magic trick? Okay, you've seen it here first, or maybe you did not see it because there's not going to be much to see. Okay, but bear with me, okay? This is my hat, my top hat, okay? And I'm gonna first to show that, I am a magician, because you got to show your credentials up front, okay? What I'm gonna do is what every magician has to learn the first day of class, and that is you have to make a rabbit disappear, okay? So first thing you got to do as a magician is know how to make a rabbit disappear. If you can't do that, you're not a magician. Okay, that's like the ABCs. Okay, so I show the hat. You see there's nothing in there. Okay, okay, and I take my rabbit. Okay, here. Hold still, bunny. Shaking there, you ask, why do I grab the bunny by the ears? His name is Bugs, by the way. Because, that's the best way to handle a rabbit. They scratch, they kick around. Hold on, bunny. Okay, here, let's put them in there. Okay, okay. Okay, easy now, easy now. I'm gonna make you disappear now, okay? Don't get excited. Okay, so here goes. Abracadabra, chupacabra, voila! The rabbit disappeared, okay? No more rabbit. Okay, having done that trick, now let's move to the real trick. I'm gonna make time disappear, okay? Next trick. So there's nothing in there, okay? I hope you can see there's nothing in there. Okay, I'm gonna grab a little bit of time here. Got a lot of time on my hand, okay? Pour it in there, sprinkled it, okay? And I say, a la peanut butter sandwich. Shazam! And time disappeared. Okay? Yeah, these are great tricks. But, what I found over the years is that it's pretty easy to make things disappear, especially if they're not there to begin with. But the other thing I learned, and that a lot of magicians will agree with me, is that you can make a rabbit reappear. You can make him disappear, now you make him appear. Yeah, you can make him reappear. I for example, I can take the rabbit and even turn him into a clock if I want, okay? I can turn him into an elephant. Once you know the trick, you can turn him into anything. I mean, you've seen it probably with other magicians as well. They take a little animal, maybe a rabbit, and they produce an elephant on stage. That's easy to do. What I've never seen, and you'll never see, because I haven't learned how to do that yet, is to make time reappear. Once time disappears, I don't know the trick to make it reappear like I would with a rabbit. So all I can tell you is that I'm working on it, and whenever I find out a way of making time reappear, I will perform the trick here on stage directly to you, okay? But as of today, I don't know anyone who can make time reappear, okay? Okay, having said that, let's do a little recap of what we did these last few days. And we went over distance. Started with distance and find out that we have distance traveled, which belongs to math, not to physics. Whereas distance separation belongs to physics and not to math, because it's a qualitative concept. Okay, that's the first thing we noticed. What is distance traveled? Just amount traveled in a period of time. What is distance for physics? Just separation, gap. Okay, that's all we see, the separation between two objects. Okay, and in mathematics, okay, mathematics as we call it, distance traveled is equal to position, equal to displacement, equal to length. They're all dynamic concepts. All four of those are dynamic concepts. Not one of them is a static concept. Okay, I talked about that the other day, so you can look at the previous video. Velocity is equal to speed plus direction. The problem with that is that direction belongs strictly to physics. Direction is a qualitative concept. A mathematician can't put direction and put it in an equation. What's he going to do with it? Okay, so you can't use direction in mathematics. And yet, when they talk about velocity, they talk about direction. In fact, you won't hear very much the term velocity of light. Usually they talk about the speed of light, okay? Because if it's velocity of light, it turns the corner, and now the question is, has it accelerated? And people say, well, no, all it did is change direction. Yeah, but direction belongs to physics, first of all. And second, I showed the other day that you still have this centripetal motion, acceleration, and that's called acceleration. And the way they calculate velocity, which is a single point in space and time, meaning single location, meaning a cross section of time, is by performing the derivative, by calculating it. So we don't have a value, we don't have a measured value really for velocity. It's calculated, even with the little device that you use to measure that. Okay, and then we went to time. We started time the other day, and we have, what is time? Distance traveled divided by speed. But you have to add direction, because remember, they say that time moves forward. Moves forward? Is forward a direction? I mean, is my forward the same as your forward? Is my time going in that direction and yours is coming in my direction? What direction does time flow? Is there a flow of time? Is there something flowing like a river? So what happens is that in physics, we don't use the word time at all, except when we talk about before and after, earlier, later, yesterday and tomorrow, in the sense of just, sequential time. Other than that, qualitative time. Other than that, we have no use for time at all. We don't use time in physics. Okay? Time is strictly a word that belongs to mathematics. Okay? Seconds and all that stuff, we don't care about that in physics, because in physics we're only going to explain a mechanism. And we have no use for seconds or minutes or years to explain a mechanism. Okay? We don't talk about a year, we talk about an orbit, maybe. Planet orbits the sun, we say one orbit, two orbits, that's fine with us. Okay? We don't need really seconds and minutes. Okay, so what do we have? Well, in physics, what they've put there, distance traveled divided by speed, that's just motion divided by motion. In other words, what you have is a comparison of two motions, and that is the definition that we have for time. Now, it turns out that in mathematical physics, what these people do is they turn time into a physical object. Okay? And what they do with time, they stretch it, they slow it down, they speed it up. They talk about flowing, that flows. They talk about warping it. They talk about traveling through time, like if time were a medium. So in mathematical physics, they treat at all times, when they give a physical interpretation, they always treat time as a physical object, as a substance, as a medium, as a thing. Okay? And so they do their presentation. You ask them at the end, the reporter, they say, okay, are you saying that, at the end of the presentation, right? Are you saying that time is a physical object, that it's a medium, it's a substance? Oh, of course not. Why did you think that? I mean, you're taking all the analogies too literally. And you say, well, hold it, then what was the purpose of the analogy if you were giving me a physical interpretation saying that the Earth doesn't fly out of the solar system because time is warped and the skin of the Earth comes up against the warpage of time, and that's preventing the Earth from flying out? That's the analogy you gave me. You treated time as a physical object. When I asked, is time really a physical object, like a wall? And you say, no, you're taking the analogy too literally. Well, then what was the purpose of the analogy? I mean, is time a physical object or not? And it turns out for the physical interpretations, time is always an object. But when you put the mathematicians against the ropes and begin pummeling him with questions, that's when he says, well, no, of course time is not an object. And so we have this circular argument, this contradiction, this duality, as mathematicians like to call them. Okay? And here's a proof, evidence, okay, that is the case. Here we have Mr. Brian Greene, and he had a little show, I think it was 2004, and in that show, Fabric of the Cosmos, he talked about time in the second installment. Okay, there were like 3 installments. The second one dealt with time. And this is what he says, okay? This is what Mr. Green, okay? Fellow who, I don't know what planet he comes from, because he says all these things that you would think do not come from an intelligent person at all, okay? It says, contrary to everyday experience, time may not flow at all. He was talking about flow. He says, time doesn't flow, but what he does next, he freezes the river, okay? And he says, no, it doesn't flow because it's solid. So he turns it into a physical object anyways. Then he says, it turns out that time itself can be speeded up or slowed down. Gravity can pull on time, slowing its passage. So you can see all these statements treat time as a physical object. He talks about the direction of time. What's the direction? Forward. That's the direction in which it moves. He talks about the arrow of time, again, giving it direction, giving it this forward direction. And he ends his presentation by saying that the future exists. He talks about the existence of time. So now we have a little bit of problem, because every one of these statements show that he's treating it as a physical object. And of course, when you confront him and you say, well, hold it, Brian, are you saying that time is a physical object? It flows, you can bend it, you can warp it, you can stretch it, you can make it go faster or slower, it's a medium through which you travel. You're treating it as a physical object. And so let's make sure that that's what he's saying. So here's a summary of what he said there, okay? These are the different things. He says time flows, okay, or it's a river that's frozen, one of the two, because he walks on this frozen river later on. Time is a structure, but let's look at flow first. Here's what he says about the flowing river, okay? It says, like a river, time seems to flow endlessly from one moment to the next. And the flow of time seems to always be in one direction, towards the future. Oh, in which direction does the future, is the future? That's what I'd like to know. I mean, can he point to the future? Okay, so this is the problem. He treats it like a river. He says it flows. Then he says, well, we can freeze it, and maybe time is more like a frozen river where the future and the past exist, and we walk towards the future, meaning it's got direction. Okay, so yeah, he's treating it as a physical object. It's not that, I want to make sure people don't conclude that I'm inventing all this stuff. Then he says time is equal to a structure. And here's his comment on that. He says time is some kind of thingy. Okay, says, see if we started here. So with the discovery of this unexpected link between space and time, it says they're fused together into a 4-dimensional what? Structure called space-time. He thinks it's a structure, and he says it's a 4-dimensional, meaning you cannot even imagine this structure, but he does talk about structure of space-time. Okay, and so the question here is, he's saying he's using it as a physical object, and then if you put him against the wall and say, well, are you saying that time is a physical object? Of course he'll deny it, but here he's using it as a physical object. So is time a physical object or not? I mean, it's black or white. Either it is or not. If it's not, then what is the purpose of the analogy, of using all these analogies? He says it's warped by gravity, this thing. Okay, here it is. Here's his statement on how gravity warps time. Meaning, like you warp a hammock when you sit on it. Okay, that's how he's treating time here. Okay, here it is. It says, well, let's see where it starts here. Give it a second. Starts here. It says, Einstein's theory showed that gravity-like motion can affect time. Great. Okay, and he says it's as if gravity can pull on time, slowing its passage. Okay, the stronger the gravitational pull, the more time slows. If you could travel to a black hole, the effect of gravity on time would be huge. Okay, so what is he saying? He's saying there's a concept called gravity, and this concept has the ability to affect time physically, because he's talking about slowing time down. I didn't even know that time was speeding up or going fast or going anywhere. And here this guy is saying, look, if time is going fast, don't worry. Just put a little gravity in there, sprinkle it in there like I did it, today with my top hat, and you can slow it down. Okay, so this is what these folks are saying. And so you're saying, well, are they giving you a figure of speech or something? Or is this an analogy, a simile? What is this? What kind of physical interpretation is this to say that gravity slows time down? Is time running fast? Okay. And then he ends this thing saying time exists. How can time exist? Here he says, give it a second here. We'll go from the start. And he looks like a little choir boy, from the monastery. Once we know that your now can be what I consider the past, or your now can be what I consider the future, and your now is every bit as valid as my now, okay? Then we learn that the past must be real, the future must be real. They could be your now. I like his faces because he looks like a born-again mathematician. He says they all exist. Past, present, and future, all equally real. They all exist. So he's saying that time exists. That's what he's saying. He's saying the past, present, and future in this big, block universe that these people like to talk about. He says time exists. That's what that block universe is. It's a single chunk of frozen water. It's not flowing. And you can find the future and the past all in that block. And all you have to do, of course, is if you want to travel to the future, just take your, your rocket and somehow reach that destination in the future. This is what these people are saying. Okay. So does he treat it as a physical object? Of course he does. In every statement that he's got in that video, and he's not the only one, by the way, I'm picking on him, but they're all the same. They all tell you that time is a thing. They treat it as a thing, and so you say, well, is time a thing? What if we ask people out there, what do they think a time is? How would they define it? What notions do people have of time? So I went into Quora and found out, but before that, to compare, we have Mr. St. Augustine, and he says, what then is time? He said this in the year 400, or thereabouts, 397, 400 AD. He says, what then is time? If no one asks me, I know what it is. Okay? If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know. And here we are, 1700 years later, and people still don't have any idea what time is. These are some of the answers in Quora. There were 100, so I didn't get them all. But you can see some of the first ones that are out there. It says, time is motion, one fellow says. Another one says, the interval between successive events. Another one says, no one can exactly describe time as such. Another one says, we literally don't know what time is. Another one repeats the first one, says, detectable, measurable change. Another one says, there is no agreed definition of time. And the other one finally says, time is what a clock measures. Anyone who claims to know any more than this is either lying or deluded. Okay, so those are the notions of time. Do we have any idea what time is? Of course not. None of these people have any idea what time is because they try to define it in terms of their religion. When you introduce religion, you want to hold on to your religion, you're going to end up with lousy definitions. Okay, that's the problem. Okay, so we asked the question. This is the only real important question, these two questions. Okay, the first one. Is time an object? Okay. Is time a physical object? Is time a thing? And, those are synonyms so that you don't use that in the definition if you're going to define it. You can't use the word entity, medium, substance, structure, any of those, because those are synonyms of thing. Okay? So you can't use those words. But is it a thing? Is time a thing? And for that, you need to define what a thing is so that you can answer that question. And the other one is, does time exist? Okay? Can we say that time exists? And a lot of people would say that time is not a thing, but time exists. That would be I think the majority of people, 90% of the people out there at least, would answer that question that way. They would say, time is not an object, okay, but time exists. That's what I think people would answer. Okay, so let's find out what an object is, because we need to find out what an object is to be able to answer the question. Before we can answer whether time is an object, we need to find out what an object is. So let's make sure we at least eliminate it as an object, scientifically, okay? So here, let's eliminate it completely, okay? An object, that which has shape. Okay, you don't like the definition? No problem. You come up with a better mousetrap. That's your job. You know, you got to find out what's wrong with this definition, what's good about yours. Otherwise, this definition sticks, okay? And no, we don't use tradition. We don't raise our hands and vote. That's not the way it works in science. We don't say, well, this is the way we've always done it. This is what every person on earth believes that an object is. We don't care about any of that. This is what I found in the dictionary and copied and pasted. None of that is scientific. No, in science, we defend our definition. We put a definition up there. You don't like it, put a better one up there. And show what's wrong with this one and put yours and show what's good about yours. That's the way it works. Shape is the only universal property of objects. All objects have shape. Okay? There is no object you can imagine that does not have shape. So it's a universal property, and that's a good point to define the word object in terms of shape. Okay? And we have the golden principle of physics. You can't do physics without an object because physics requires an object. What would there be to study if, or analyze or anything if there were no objects in the universe? If all we had was empty space. Okay, so you have to have some object for a phenomenon to happen. It is irrational to use concepts as objects in physics, known as the fallacy of reification. You cannot use a concept like love and turn it into a heart, or take intelligence and turn it into a brain, or take grace and turn it into God or whatever. Okay, you can't do that, not in physics. In ordinary speech, you can get away with all that stuff. It's in physics, in science, that you can't do that. Okay? In ordinary speech, you can say whatever you want. Okay, if time is deemed to be a concept, okay, this word cannot be used as an object in the course of a physical interpretation. Okay? So if time is an object, under that definition, shape, well, all you have to tell me is, what does time look like? You should be able to draw it. Okay? If you think that time has shape. If time does not have shape, we have rejected it officially, scientifically, as an object. It stays as a concept. There are only two possibilities. Every word in the dictionary is either an object or a concept. If it's not an object because time does not have shape, we're done. We're finished. Okay? Time is not an object. Okay, according to that definition. He who doesn't like the definition has to come up with a better mousetrap. Again, has to defend his definition and show what's wrong with this one. That's it. That's all they got to do. Very simple, actually, right? Okay, and so the next issue is existence. Okay, does time exist? Okay, and so here we have a sequence of definitions that we need to answer that question. The first one is, what is an object? An object is that which has shape. What is distance? Well, it's separation between two objects. What is location? It's a set of distances from one object to all the rest in the system or in the world or in the universe, right? And what is a concept? It's a word that invokes or embodies two objects. You need two objects, a relation between two objects to have a concept. So either every word in the dictionary is either a concept, meaning that you have a relation there between, made by a human, obviously, usually, right? I mean, a lion, I guess, can have concepts in his mind to some degree, right? And the opposite is the object. And the best way to look at that is, does it have shape? Does it not have shape? If it has shape, it's an object. We're done. If it doesn't have shape, it's a concept. We're done as well. Okay? And so what does exist? Well, the definition is physical presence. Okay? What is physical stands for object. What is presence? For location. It's an object that has location. What was location? The set of distances to all other objects. Then we can say that the object exists. And as you can see, concepts are not allowed to exist. No concept can be said to exist in physics. In ordinary speech, you can say that love exists. We don't care about that. That's religion. That's just, nonsense talk. In physics, only objects can be said to exist, and in order to exist, they have to have location with respect to other objects. So if you are imagining a table, that table is an object because it has shape, but it has no distance with respect to any other object because it's an imaginary table. Okay? So let's keep the right context there in mind. Okay, so we have a definition for exist. And again, you don't have to agree with any of these definitions. If you don't like them, you have only one recourse, and that's to get inside the ring with your shield, with your sword, fight for your definition, and show what's wrong with these definitions, either individually or as a whole. Okay, so what do we conclude here? We would say time is not an object because time does not have shape. Shape of a concept, irrational. No concept has shape. And time does not have location. First, because it's not an object, and so you can't have, it's a concept. And then second, concepts don't have shape, so you can't establish a distance with respect to anything. Therefore, it doesn't have location. Okay? Because location is a set of distances. What are the conclusions? Time is not an object. Time has no location. Time is a concept, and pursuant to the definition of exist that you see up there, time does not exist. In physics. In ordinary speech and religion, you can say whatever you want. You can say God exists. If you're going to talk rationally, you're going to talk into the world of science. If you want to step over the line into physics, and that's what you do when you use the word exist in any way, shape, or form, then if you want to show that, your theory, you want to prove your theory, you want people to believe in your theory, hey, come over here. We'll take care of your definitions first. And if you don't have a good definition for exist that you can match against these, well, you got to accept these definitions. Otherwise, you got to come up with a better mousetrap. And so you can say, well, I believe that God exists. Yeah, or the other guy might say, I don't believe that God exists. Well, you haven't said anything until you define exist, let alone God. So we need to define the word exist, then we can figure out whether God exists or not. And the same thing with time. Does time exist? Well, what do you mean by exist? What do you mean? Is time an object? What do you mean by object? So first we need to define the words object and exist. Then we can use the terms consistently in our dissertation and say time is an object or time is not an object. Time exists or time does not exist. We can say it because now we have definitions that we can, stand upon. We have laid the foundations to be able to talk about time in a rational manner, okay, to another human being. Okay, so here are some corollaries, okay, from these definitions. Okay, here it is. Objects we point to. Because they have shape, you should be able to point to an object. Even the one in your head, because all you have to do is draw what you have in your head outside, and then you can point to what you were thinking of. So you can present that to a jury, you can present that to in a conference, you can say, well, what are you thinking of? What do you think light is? Well, I think this is light, and you can show them what you think it is. Maybe a series of particles, maybe a wave, or maybe a rope, right? Concepts we define. So if you can define it, it's not an object. Okay, let's repeat that because that goes through a lot of people's head and out the other door, right? Concepts we define. If you can define a word, it's not an object. It can't be an object. Objects we point to. In physics, in science, in ordinary speech, you can do whatever you want. Not important at all. We're talking about science here. Objects you should be able to point to because the only property all objects have, the universal property, is shape. Do they exist? Well, if it has location, now it exists by definition. Not because you believe or stop believing, but because by definition, okay, it has location. And then if you can define the word time, then time is a concept. And yeah, we're going to try to define the word time, but here's some more corollaries. If you have more rational definition for these strategic terms, don't copy and paste definitions you find in dictionaries of ordinary speech. This just means that you haven't challenged or understood these definitions and accepted them, rather, on the basis of authority, tradition, and democracy, meaning majority vote. You're just looking behind you to find out if all these mathematicians are behind you and stand behind you. I don't care if the whole 8 billion people stand behind you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make it right. You can all be flat earthers and it doesn't make the earth flat. Okay? You are doing religion. That's what you're doing. And proponents must defend the rationale behind their proposals. In other words, you got to get in the ring with your shield and sword and fight like a man. Okay, don't be a coward. Don't run away. Don't tell me this is what they told you. This is how they educated you, that you found it in a dictionary, that everybody believes in your definition. None of that matters. The only way is to get inside the ring, attack the definitions you saw there, and defend the ones you have. That's the only way. There is no other way. So don't look behind you. There's no one else in this island except you and me. Okay? There's no one else. No one's going to back you up. And if they do, it's irrelevant anyways. Okay, so one fellow gave time a try. Okay, he says the definition of time. Time is change, he says, or the interval over which change occurs. If a system is unchanging, it is timeless. Okay, we only need something that repeats predictably to have a measurement of time. Okay, let's find out all the errors this fellow made. He made so many errors only in that small piece of sequence of statements. Here are the errors with all that. Okay, interval is a synonym of time. Okay, what is an interval? You look it up, an intervening period of time. So you can't use the word interval to define time. Change is equal to motion, but motion is not equal to time. They're not synonyms. Motion and time are a little bit different. Okay, time requires more than just change. So far, all you have is motion, and time requires memory. Motion does not. Move, you move by definition. You have two locations. Okay, you don't have to memorize the previous one. All you have to do is, by definition, you have to have two locations. But time, you have to have a comparison of two motions. You have to memorize your origin of each one of the objects that you're comparing. Okay, or you could have it even, the same object compared to another chunk of itinerary for that same object. But you're comparing essentially two objects even when you do that. So what you're doing is comparing two motions. And for that, you need to memorize the origin of those two motions and compare them later on, when you finally reach the end of those two motions and you're comparing them. And yeah, so here's a clear definition of time. Okay, and it's we have qualitative time, a relation established between two locations of an object or between the trajectories of two objects. Okay, there you see what it is. Okay, what you see is the Earth going around the sun. That's how they more or less established the first second, or one of the first seconds. They had several seconds throughout history. Okay, several ways of measuring it, but it had to do with the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And what are we doing when we talk about a second? Well, originally, right, because today we have a different standard for the second, but for many centuries, what we had is that the second was essentially the movement of the hand on the clock, or it could be any other motion, compared against the motion of the Earth around the sun. What they did was they took the orbit of the Earth and chopped it up into days and then into hours and minutes and seconds, and they ended up with the second. And we built our clocks based on that. And we said, okay, when that hand on the clock moves from one tick to the other, the Earth went 30 kilometers around the sun. That's essentially what a second is, the comparison of two motions. Okay. Now you have the quantitative time that mathematics use. Okay, we don't care about that. You can read it later on. But that essentially gives you an idea of what time is conceptually. From a conceptual point of view, it's a comparison of two motions, and for that you absolutely need memory. Okay? You can't do time without memory. Okay, incidentally, let me point out a couple issues here. What is the CGS, the centimeter, gram, second metric system, or you can call it also the kilogram, meter, meter, kilogram, second system? Second doesn't change. What changes is the meter or the kilo only. Okay, but when you have a meter, like here I have a meter. Okay, let me take this out of here so you can see it better. Okay, here you have a meter. Well, just a measuring stick. Okay, and or you have this. To measure. Whatever you want, any meters or whatever, but you have a standard called the meter. Once you have that standard, you can put that standard anywhere you want, okay, because it's a physical standard. And for the kilogram, the same thing. You have a chunk of whatever, you can have a chunk of lead, And you can call it the meter, you can call it the you can call it the kilogram or the gram, or you can call it, maybe in the land of the Klingons, they call it the X, whatever that unit is. You have a chunk of something, and that's going to be your standard because you arbitrarily designated that as your standard. But for the second, we have no physical object. Okay, there is no physical. What are you measuring? Okay, this is the issue. There's no physical object when you're measuring time. Okay, time is actually calculated again originally as a segment or piece of the orbit of the Earth, and today they do it with the cesium wavelength, right? But essentially, you're measuring. That's it. But there's no physical standard for time. Whereas you have a physical standard for the meter and you have a physical standard for the kilogram, which are the three main ones for the metric system, the foundation. Okay, and because these people never define their terms, these mathematicians, they don't know what time is, but they use it. They tell you that they bend time, that they warp it, they travel through it, that they can make it go slow or fast depending on how much gravity there is or mass or whatever. And because they have all these, they never define time, but they use it, and they tell you that they treat it as a physical object, then they take back everything they said at the end of the story and say, well, no, time is not a physical object. Then you don't know what to think. They have all these weird things. But it turns out that one of the things that the mathematicians tell you is that the universe is expanding. Why? Because you have this Big Bang that happened 13.7 or 8 billion years ago. And since then, there's been this expansion. The expansion of what? What's been expanding? Well, the universe has been expanding and is expanding. That's what they tell you. And then in another context, they tell you the universe is infinite. Space is infinite. Time is infinite. I mean, where does time end? Doesn't time continue forever? And they say, well, the universe is infinite. They like to say that, like saying, they leave it beyond your comprehension. That's why they use the word infinite. So they say, here's infinity, time expanding. And it turns out that here you have infinity expanding. This is so weird because we have a contradiction there. Okay, this is their logic. The universe is infinite. Nothing is outside of space, okay, meaning it's really finite, but they say it's infinite, but it's a wrong question to ask what's outside of space or space-time. And then they tell you that this infinity is expanding. And what is pushing it outwards? Well, it's this thingy called dark energy. What is preventing it from expanding faster? Well, it's this pull of gravity, which they call dark matter. So we have dark matter fighting against dark energy. Dark matter pulls inwards, and the universe wants to expand against what? Against nothing, because it's infinite. And we have this infinity that's expanding, time which is expanding. You figure it out. Okay, let's get to the questions that we had since last time. And we have a fellow here, and he asked the following. He says, you said the links of a tight straight rope are shorter at both far ends, while at the middle of the rope, the links are longer. Yeah, this is what I think is happening. Okay, I'm proposing that. The links of taut wires on utility posts, or what you called a telephone post in your video, are not that different from each other. Well, not that different means they are different. Okay, so it's black or white. Either they are different or they're not that different, meaning they are different. Okay, let's make sure you understand your own language. You can simply observe people who play tug of war and see whether the lengths of that rope change drastically or not. Drastically means they changed. It's a black or white issue. Did they change? Did they not change? So again, the fellow doesn't understand the words that he's using there. They have changed. All you're talking about is degree of change. Okay? What you're trying to say is the electromagnetic ropes are similar to macro level rubber thread. Absolutely not. The thread is made of a single piece, so it doesn't stretch. Okay? So it's not a rubber thread. Let's clarify that. Okay? Where when we stretched it out, the middle of the rubber thread become longer, while both of the far ends of the rubber threads remain the same. I don't know what kind of brain this poor fellow has. No, what we're saying here is that, if you take a rope and you stretch it all the way to the moon, as you get farther and farther away from the earth, the links will tend to be longer. That's what we're saying. No stretching necessary, just that you have towards the center, they're going to unwind a little more than closer to the source. And so this is not an issue of stretching, it's an issue of untwisting, okay? So, where you got this, I don't know. But then this begs the question, now are you talking about a single thread can actually stretch? No, they don't stretch, okay? And your website, you keep saying a single thread can't be stretched, correct? Can't be stretched. And here you see it in the Harvard Tower experiment, okay? Here it is, more or less. At the bottom, okay, where there was a source, and as the wave went to the top of the tower, they were able to measure cross-section, okay, cross-section of the rope. They were able to measure that the rope was tighter at the bottom than at the top. Very little difference, again, very little difference, but enough difference that they were able to measure that difference. Again, with any rope, you can probably see that. Just take a rope and stretch it to the other side of the universe, and you'll see if the links remain the same. Do the links have the same length? And I'm telling you they won't. And so again, this fellow talks about drastically. No, it's not a question of drastically. That's a question of how much. We're not talking about how much. We're saying they will not have the same length. Okay, so that's the only thing he's got to understand there. Okay, another fellow says, definition of object, a material thing that can be seen and touched. Okay, a requirement to meet this definition, material is three-dimensional. Shape has nothing to do with being an object. Oh, although objects have shape. Sounds like a contradiction, because if objects have shape, then apparently that's the definition of object. But then he tries to cure, he says not all shapes are object. Well, I don't know. Until we have a definition, we don't know. And so let's find out what's wrong with this definition, why we can't use that in science. It's relegated to religion, to ordinary speech, no chance whatsoever in science. And here are the problems. The first one is material. Material is substance that constitutes an object. What is substance? An object, a thing. What is object? A thing, an object. So you can't use the word material because you're using a synonym to define the word object. And the same for matter. There you can see the same things, the same words. Okay, then you have the word thing. It's synonym of object. Okay, so you can't say material thing, because thing is what an object is. That's the word we're trying to define. So the word material already embodies the word object, and the word thing is a synonym of object. So you can't use either one of those two words. Then you have a bigger problem here. Seen, he talks about seen and touched. Seen is a verb, and verbs require two objects. In this case, you need the thing that is seen and the thing that is being seen. So you need two objects to have the word seen. And nevertheless, we define the word object before we define any verb, because verb in action is what objects do. And the same goes for the word touch. It's a verb that requires two objects. In order to have touch, you need two objects. Sorry. Okay? So you can't do touch without two objects. You already have a contradiction, because you need two objects to define the word object, as you're trying to do here. Okay, so yeah, none of those, that definition, probably copied and pasted it from some ordinary dictionary, and he wants to use that in science. No way, you can't use that definition. It's not a scientific definition. Okay, here's another issue. You made an observation to have an assumption. No, you don't need to observe anything to make an assumption. In fact, you can't. Listen what I'm telling you. You can't observe to have an assumption, okay? And let me tell you what I'm talking about, okay? Here's my famous experiment. It's called the gravity experiment. You let go of the pen, okay? And it falls to the table. I do it again, repeatable to be scientific, okay? Again, let go, it falls to the table. Now, can you see, observe what's here or up here? Is something pushing the pen? Is something pulling on the pen? Can you see it? Can you observe it? Can't you make an assumption about what's invisible here that is coming in contact with the skin of the pen? Can't you make an assumption and say, let us assume that there are a bunch of particles pushing down on the pen? I can make that assumption. I don't need to see them. I don't need to observe. I can observe the pen, but I can't observe the mechanism or the thing that's coming in contact with the pen to produce gravity, acceleration towards the center of the earth. So I can't see or touch what's up here. I can't see or touch what's down here, but I can make an assumption and say, what if, let us assume there are particles pushing down. I can make that assumption. I can also make an assumption and say, well, what if every atom is connected from every one of these atoms to every atom of the earth? What if they're all interconnected? I can make that assumption. I don't have to see or touch them. And so to make an assumption, you do not need to see. In fact, you can't observe Mother Nature's mediators for gravity, for light, for magnetism. You cannot observe them. You cannot see them. So no, you do not see, you can't see the mediators Mother Nature uses. You have to make an assumption without observing, okay? And here you have a little, put it over here, what the religion of mathematics says, okay? What they do is they use the word observe as a synonym of the word proof. That's the context. So when they say observe, they mean I proved it because I observed it. You're gonna deny that I observed it, or you call me a liar? That's what they're saying, okay? And yeah, did Faraday observe a magnetic field? Did Rutherford observe the space, the empty space between the atom, the nucleus, and the electron? Or did he just make an assumption and say, let us assume there's empty space in between there, and that's with that assumption I can explain my theory of why, we have this radiation come back when it hits the nucleus and go through when it goes through that empty space. So he was able to explain his theory based on the assumption that the atom is surrounded by mostly empty space. That's an assumption. He never saw the empty space for sure. He didn't see the nucleus. He didn't see the electron. He did not observe any of that. It's a theory founded on the assumption that an atom is mostly empty space. Did Stephen Hawking, did he ever see a black hole? And he can't make an assumption. He can't say, let us assume that there is something called a black hole. Okay, let's concede, no problem. And we'll call it a ball. So there's a little ball with a lot of mass, gazillions of mass, gazillions of kilograms, gazillions of tons, whatever you want to put in there. Okay, so we have this little ball, and it's got all this mass concentrated in it. And now he says, with that, I can explain the attraction of a star far away, because this has so much mass, it's pulling on it. Or maybe it's weighing down space-time and this thing falls in, whatever the case may be. Did he observe a black hole? No, the black hole is an assumption. He's saying, let us assume there's a black hole. But again, they turn it around, they say, we proved it. We took a picture of it. We took a picture of a black hole. Oh, you did you? And it turns out what they took a picture of is some matter which they claim rushed into a black hole. Again, they confuse the water with a drain. Okay, the water is what they took a picture of. The drain they can't take a picture of because it's zero-dimensional, infinite mass, etc., etc. Okay, so keep that in mind. And of course, the blind man, he didn't see the particles of light. Okay, so he can make an assumption, say, let us assume that light is mediated. Okay, that light is a series of particles. Okay, he can make that assumption. He doesn't have to see, observe anything. Okay, so no, we do not need to observe anything in order to make assumptions. Okay, here's another fellow says, you make up your own scientific definition that doesn't include observation and experimentation. Well, it's not that, it doesn't matter who comes up with it, whether it's mine or someone else. Okay, the question is, do we have a scientific method that we can live with? And the question right now is that we don't out there. Because these people, what they're doing is they're saying, okay, I have a scientific method. Okay, apply it. And they apply it and they end up with explanations or physical interpretations where they say, A particle can be at two places at once. Gravity is the warping of space-time, meaning two concepts, and so on down the line. I mean, I could, what is a black hole? A zero-dimensional nothing that has infinite mass, and so on down the line. Big Bang, the beginning of space, the creation of space. Not even God can create space, and here these people created space from nothing, whatever nothing is, and so on. So, it's on and on and on. What are the results? The results is we have no explanations today for how this universe works. These people tell you in your face, that they don't understand quantum mechanics. They don't understand relativity. They cannot explain it in a rational way. They say, we don't understand it. So all they're doing is a bunch of math, a bunch of equations, but they cannot turn that into a physical interpretation. So what's the use of that so-called scientific method that Galileo and Newton, all these great fellows of the 17th century came up with? And then we have the other issue that, when they came up with that, they overruled the Greeks who had been around for 2,000 years. And now we're doing the same thing to these people. We're saying these 400 years were wasted because right now we don't have a scientific method that produces physical interpretations. And so now it's time for these guys to get out, just like they got rid of the classical Greeks. Now we get rid of them. We say, hey, we don't need your so-called scientific method because it hasn't produced any results. We still don't understand how this universe works, meaning causes, mechanisms. We have no mechanism for gravity. We have no mechanism from mathematical physics. We have no mechanism from mathematical physics for magnetism. We have no mechanism for electricity or light or the workings of the atom. Okay, so that's where we stand today. So how do we do it in science? We say rational explanations. That's what we need. That's what science is. We need a rational explanation. That's science. If you give me an irrational explanation and a bunch of equations, that's not science. Okay? And you can't say, well, I ran an experiment and observed and predicted. It's nonsense, poppycock. Okay, so what is explanation? What is rational? Well, we have a definition for those. Okay. Explain causes underlying a phenomenon or how a consummated event happened. That's what we call an explanation in physics. I mean, this is as applied to physics. That's what a theory is. And a theory is not an equation. A theory is not a mathematical formula. Okay? Theory is an explanation. What is an explanation? Causes underlying a phenomenon. What is rational and irrational? Because science is rational explanation. Well, we define what irrational is, and the number one is there. You can't treat a concept as a physical object for a physical interpretation, which is exactly what mathematical physics does. So these people are always giving you physical interpretations where they're reifying concepts. And that's a no-no in science. Okay? So yeah, if that's what is allowed by the scientific method of the 17th century, it's time for it to die, to be wiped out completely. We don't need the scientific method of Newton and Galileo, meaning experiments and math. That's not science. That has only produced nonsense. We have no explanations. Science is not just descriptions. Science is explanations, and they better be rational. Okay, a couple more questions or issues here. One fellow says, is a scientist cheating the RSM, the rational scientific method, if he or she makes a hypothesis that some large mass of computronium exists, but with it makes a theory that is essentially just a description of the software that the computer runs and claiming that it explains a magical universe, perhaps even identical to the one proposed by the establishment. After all, computers have no problem with point particles, bent time waves, and everything else conceivable. Yeah, you can make an assumption of anything, just like here. You can make an assumption that God sends his angels to move the earth around the sun. You can make that assumption. You can say, let us assume that God exists. God is that human being there, human-like fellow, okay, has hands, arms, whatever. He's out there, he's got a big head, big intelligence, a computer inside his brain, right? And he doesn't do the work. He sends his angels. So here's angel Archangel Michael or whoever, and he takes the earth around the sun. And you have explained with that how the earth goes around the sun. Okay? Well, that has some challenges, but certainly it's a little more rational than what we get from mathematical physics, which says that there's a concept called space-time that somehow is pulled downwards, and it's a surrealistic vision because they're taking this as a two-dimensional canvas. They're telling you it's a four-dimensional canvas, but they illustrate a two-dimensional one to show you why the earth goes around the sun. And you say, well, why doesn't the earth run out of the sun? Well, it doesn't, because the sun warps this space-time canvas, which is not a canvas, which is a concept turned into an object, which you deny at the end of your presentation, and you say that's what gravity is. Well, between the two, I'll go with the angel anytime. I mean, I think it's more rational. At least I can see the angel pushing the earth. I can understand that. This nonsense, no one can understand. Or you get the electromagnetic wave. You say, okay, what is an electromagnetic wave? That's light. Okay, what is it? And what it is a field, a couple fields, perpendicular fields. Okay, what's a field? Well, it's just a bunch of numbers that are flowing. Numbers flowing? What is this, Bitcoin? I mean, the numbers are flowing and they have direction. I mean, what the hell is this? This is not a rational explanation because you don't have a physical object. So again, I'd rather go with God and the angels than with this nonsense on the right. And then when you go to God and the angels, well, there are problems there too. I mean, among others, why would the angel have wings if he's got nothing to flap against in space out there, among others, So, and what's pushing him and so on. Okay, so all I'm saying is you can make any assumptions you want, like I pointed out some time back, a couple weeks ago, I think. You can make an assumption that a unicorn made a hole in the wall by ramming it with his horn, right? You can make that assumption. Okay, now we just want to know what's inside your brain. We want to know what mechanism you propose for the hole on the wall. And you say, well, it was a unicorn. Okay, that's your explanation. If that's the one you believe, I can't take it away from your brain anyways. I mean, that's the one you believe. I can invent a horse that's got a horn and call him a unicorn and say, well, it was a unicorn that did that. Because I have a horse that has a horn. It's an artificial horn that I built into his head and he just rams things with it. Okay, so that's how you think the hole was made. Another person might say it was a rock or a drill or whatever. So we have different explanations, and we just need to know what's going on through your head, what explanation you give it, and from there everybody then goes home and does his own religion, believes in whichever one he wants. But certainly you cannot come to the conference and say the hole was made by time. What do you mean it was made by time? Yeah, time bent inside the wall and made the hole. I mean, this is the kind of answers you get from mathematical physics. And of course, at the end of it, they say, first, time is not an object, and then they say, well, we don't understand it either, and we don't care, because we do math, we do equations. Okay, final issue, fellow says, finally discovered Kenny Wheeler, poor fellow there. And so, angry Buddhist. And so he discovered Wheeler. He thinks that Wheeler has something in common with me, and so I got to stop him right there. No, Kenny doesn't have absolutely nothing in common with my theory at all. Okay, what does Kenny do? Well, he invents fancy words. He throws them around like if you knew what he's talking about. And everybody says, oh, look at all those big words he's using. He must be intelligent. And so what does he push around? He pushes around ether. What is ether? Field, dielectric, whoa, energy, inertia, and then what? Counter space. Well, counter space is the amount of space I need on the counter for my beer. That's about all I know about counter space. The only word that maybe has anything to do with science, because all these other words have nothing to do with physics or science. But and that's the one he uses to do his presentation. So he can spin all this stuff around and think he's talking sensibly when he's not. He's got to define these words, and when you look at his definitions, they're even worse than the words that he uses. Okay, but then he goes into matter. That's the only one that has something to do, if anything, with physics. But he defines it as what? As ultra high energy wet light. Okay, we don't know what energy is. He doesn't know what light is, so we're back to nothing. Yeah, no, Kenny, he's just on the internet to make money. He's not there to teach you anything regarding science. You're never going to understand anything about how this universe works through Kenny Wheeler. Okay, Theoria Apophysis. Okay, with that, I'll see you next time. It'll probably be next week. Got a little birthday party on Sunday, so I'll see you next Wednesday. We'll see you then. Bye bye.